In the year 2000, a team of scientists gathered 136 babies and toddlers and made a decision that sounds almost impossible today. They flipped a coin. Heads, the child would be placed with a foster family. Tails, the child would remain exactly where they were. And where they were was a Romanian state institution, rows of metal cribs, and sometimes just one caregiver responsible for a dozen or more babies at once. If you had walked into one of those wards, the first thing you'd have noticed is how quiet it was. Not peaceful, quiet in a way that felt wrong. Visitors kept asking the same question: why do the babies barely cry? The answer, when researchers finally understood it, was devastating. Crying had stopped working. When an infant calls out again and again and no one comes, not once, not twice, but hundreds of times, the infant's brain learns a hard lesson. Calling out is pointless, so it stops. Not because the baby is calm, because the baby has given up. This is the story of the Bucharest Early Intervention Project, one of the most controversial experiments ever conducted on human development. And what scientists found inside those quiet wards would reshape how we understand the human brain itself.
How it began. To understand why 170,000 children ended up in state care, go back to 1966, when dictator Nicolae Ceausescu decided the country needed more citizens. He outlawed contraception and made abortion illegal for almost all women under 40. Families without at least 4 or 5 children faced financial penalties. Birth rates spiked. But Romania was poor, and most families couldn't feed the children they were now required to have. The government's answer? Give the children to the state. By the late 1980s, roughly 170,000 children were living in institutions. On paper, these weren't places of neglect. Children were fed, medicated, kept clean. But something essential was missing: people. There weren't enough adults to hold every child or respond when they cried. Caregivers managed 15 or 20 infants at once. Feed, change, move to the next crib. So the babies adapted. Visitors described toddlers rocking themselves for hours, staring at ceilings, entertaining themselves in silence because no one else was going to. When Ceausescu's regime collapsed in 1989, the world finally saw what had been happening. But one question remained: could any of this damage actually be undone? The experiment. In 2000, researchers Charles Nelson, Nathan Fox, and Charles Zena set out to find that answer through something almost unheard of in child development research: a randomized controlled study of real children's lives. The 136 children ranged from about 6 months to nearly 3 years old.
Through a coin flip, some were placed into foster families created specifically for the study, since Romania barely had a foster system at the time. The rest remained in institutional care. That randomization was the key. Without it, researchers could only compare children who happened to be adopted, usually the healthiest, most adoptable ones, against those left behind, skewing every result. The coin flip removed that bias. For the first time, scientists could isolate the true effect of moving a child from an institution into a family. What they found: the early results were stark. Brain scans of children still in institutions showed dramatically reduced electrical activity compared to typically raised children. One researcher compared it to swapping a 100-watt bulb for a 40-watt one. Same wiring, a fraction of the power. Their average IQ hovered in the low 70s. Children raised in ordinary homes averaged close to 100. Attachment told an even more troubling story. Only a small fraction of institutionalized children had formed a secure attachment, a specific bond with one trusted adult. Many did the opposite, wandering up to any adult, climbing into a stranger's lap, following anyone out the door. From a distance, that might look like friendliness. It isn't. These children had never learned that one particular person belonged to them. Without that, every adult becomes interchangeable, because none had ever proven they would stay. The turning point. Then something remarkable happened to the children placed with foster families. Their language caught up. Their IQ scores climbed. They began forming the kind of secure, specific attachments that had been missing, reaching for one caregiver, trusting they'd come back. But researchers found something even more important than the recovery itself. Timing was everything. Children placed into families before roughly age 2 showed dramatic improvement. Their brain activity moved much closer to typical. Children who stayed in institutions longer recovered far less, no matter how loving their eventual family turned out to be. Scientists called this a sensitive period, a limited window when the developing brain depends on responsive relationships to wire itself correctly. Miss that window, and the door doesn't slam shut, but it swings nearly closed. The consequences weren't only psychological. Researchers documented differences in brain structure and physical growth, and some evidence suggested early deprivation could even affect biological aging, as if the body kept score too. The message became impossible to ignore. A child doesn't just need food and medicine. A child needs a person, someone who responds, someone who holds them, someone who, when they cry, actually comes. The controversy, which brings us back to that coin flip. This study remains one of the most ethically debated in modern psychology. These were infants who couldn't consent to anything. The Romanian state, technically their guardian, allowed researchers to knowingly leave some children in institutions specifically so their outcomes could be compared to the ones who left.
Critics argue an experiment like this would never pass an ethics board today, that using children's development as a controlled variable crosses a line no study should cross. The researchers defend the design. Romania had almost no foster system at the time. The project didn't take children from families who would have cared for them. It created families where none existed. That debate has never fully resolved. But one thing is certain, there will never be another study like it. One scientist had proof that institutional deprivation could permanently alter a developing brain. Repeating the experiment became unthinkable. What came after? The children eventually grew up. Many left institutional care. But for some, that came too late. After the window researchers identified had already begun closing, their childhoods became some of the most influential evidence in the history of child welfare policy. Romania gradually restricted institutional placement for very young children, and the findings fed into a global shift away from orphanages and toward family-based care. But the most unsettling part of the story isn't really about Romania. It's about you. During your own first years, long before you could form a memory you'd recognize today, your brain was running one experiment of its own. When I call, does someone come? You cried. Someone answered. You cried again. Someone came again. Thousands of tiny repetitions, and through them, your brain quietly learned what the world was like, safe or dangerous.
Connected or alone. You don't remember any of it, but your brain does. It was shaped by that answer long before you ever learned to speak. Someone was teaching you what it meant to be human before you knew you were being taught. And for the children in those quiet Bucharest wards, for far too many of them and for far too long, nobody came.